today on Educator, diversifying the educator workforce, and glad to be here with all of you today and hear some updates around the great work that you've already been doing. And since it is discussion, perhaps our role, Marianne and I in particular, is to just continue to ask questions and identify how the board can best support your work moving forward. So Ventura, I think I will hand it over to you for the agenda today and the topics, and have you kind of facilitate who's going to speak when.
Sounds good.
Okay, thank you.
So really excited to provide just some updates about work, and I've asked Heather to be here today. She and her team have been working around two really important initiatives. One, the emergency licensure, with our licensure department, and then the MTEL pilot. So particularly for this committee as it relates to educator diversity, sharing some of the early data that we're seeing from, especially from the emergency licensure. And then Jessica and Chris will be giving an update on just legislation that we're tracking, related to educator diversification. I'd say maybe even more broadly issues of diversity within education that we think are relevant. And then we'll spend a few minutes talking about, this just ways in which the department is currently speaking to districts or making, educator diversification known, especially as districts are thinking about their ESSER and just CARES funds, that they're using. And then hopefully at the end, just say a few words around the board members received the racial equity decision-making tool and have had a chance to have some, overview on the tool and things like that. So I can just give you a quick update on next steps, where we're at with that, and maybe hear thoughts from you all as board members on, if there's any further information you'd like or how to engage with that. So, so I'll hand it over to Heather.
Thank you, Ventura. Welcome everybody, and I don't think I've met you yet, Chris. I'm Heather Pesky, and I lead a team called the Center for Instructional Support, which includes educator preparation and support for educators K-12. And we work a lot in partnership with the licensure office around licensure-related policy. So I'm going to give two updates today. The first is related to the emergency licenses. So, and if it's kind of loud, it's because I live across the street from an elementary school and the kindergarten kids are out at recess. So it's kind of nice context setting. And it reminds me to be grounded. So anyway, all that said, so you may remember that last spring of 2020, the legislature approved this issuance of an emergency license statute, which allowed us to give emergency licenses to educators who applied for them. This was this was because at the time it was very hard to get access to MTEL testing sites. Though that has shifted, meaning that there's much more access now, we were able to continue the policy through June of 2022. So what we're doing is we're looking at the data, and I will start by saying that we have out right now an RFR to hire a vendor to do an evaluation of the emergency licensure policy, because we anticipate being asked not just a number of questions now, but also for the future about whether we'll carry on with this policy, what the impacts were, which teachers ended up being licensed on emergency licenses, where they were assigned to teach, what their impact was, all of those kinds of questions. So we wanted to use it as an opportunity to learn. So I don't know yet who that vendor is, because the RFR is still out, but it closes shortly. So I can update you on that next time. But you probably have the question of like, what are the numbers in emergency licensure? And I updated board member Fernandez probably 2 months ago about this. So the data, the categories will look familiar, but the data is more recent. So I'm just gonna go to my screen and share so that you can see some of these numbers. Let me make sure I have the right tab open. Yes. Let me just share my screen. There we go. Okay. Can you all see that? All right, great. So this is just a short summary, and I want to start by saying we're using two different data sources. So those of you who are quick with data and quantitative reasoning will be like, why don't these line up? And it's because we're using two different data sources. One is ELAR, our Educator License and Renewal System, and the other is EPIMS, which is the Educator Personnel Information Management System. So we brought these two systems together, these two data sets, and I'm going to report out what we know. And again, don't worry that some of the numbers don't line up. We know that. So let's start with how many emergency licenses we've issued. It's about 8,506. And I think importantly for this committee, the people who are getting the emergency license are 12% more racially diverse than those individuals earning any other license that's been issued by the department. And this is in contrast to the licenses that we issued in 2020 compared to the emergency licenses. And we disaggregated the emergency license data by race and ethnicity. And we did this back in February. So our total count at that time when we did the disaggregation was a little bit lower. You can see there kind of in the middle of my screen. This count was about 5,532 unique individuals. So that's a little bit different. We haven't done the disaggregation yet on the most recent data, but at least this gives you a picture of where we are. So let me go down. So this represents the number of individuals within each racial category, racial or ethnic category, I should say, as well as the percent in terms of the percent of emergency licenses issued. So you can see that as you go down the list, that the highest percentages, it's actually kind of mixed. Like we have a number of emergency license issued in the category of Asian, not Hispanic, Latino. Black or African American, Hispanic, Latino is at about 2.4%. You see that where my cursor is. Black or African American, not Hispanic, Latino is about 9.2%. And Hispanic, Latino, where race is unreported, is at about 4.3% or 242 licenses. Again, this number is based on February, so it's likely to be a little bit higher now, but this was at the end of February, so it gives you some idea. I'll also point out that we were able to disaggregate by categories of 2 or more races, which we don't usually do, but we were able to do it in this instance. And in terms of the percentage of educators who reported being white, not Hispanic or Latino on emergency licenses, it's about 49% or 48.8%. So let me just pause there and see if you have any questions so far before I tell you where they're teaching, which I'm sure you're interested in terms of their assignments.
Thank you. This is so interesting, and I can't wait for you to kind of say what this is telling us, but at least high level, since you're waiting to do evaluation. But I am wondering, will there be any ability to kind of look back at the individuals themselves and their MTEL record? So are these folks who may not have passed the MTEL and this was their opportunity to come in and teach? I mean, do we know that information?
Yes, I think we've assumed it. I can go back and ask if we can double check it. But if they passed the MTEL, then they could have applied for a provisional license. If they just passed the MTEL but didn't do an educator preparation program, they could have applied for a provisional license rather than an emergency license. So our assumption is that these individuals who applied for an emergency license did so because they either couldn't access the MTEL or they accessed it previously and were not able to pass it.
Right.
But I'll go back and double check, Amanda, because those are two distinct populations, right? Like, were you not able to take it at all because it was last spring and you couldn't access a testing site, or have you taken it multiple times and not been able to pass it?
Yeah,
it represents both.
That's helpful because I mean to sort of inform the other question about MTEL, right? So.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
Let me go down to the, so this data is from October 2020 from our EPIMS or Educator Personnel Information Management System data collection. So this is when districts submit their hiring data and their staffing data to us. So this is the most recent data available in terms of teacher assignment. So this, I'm going to skip through this because this was really old. This is from October in terms of emergency licenses, and I just updated you more recently. But I wanted to note here at the top of my screen, the top 4 license areas where districts were hiring emergency licensed individuals. This is in October. Moderate disabilities came out as one of the top 4 areas, elementary licenses, which kind of surprised me because that's usually one of the easiest areas to fill in terms of there's usually like an oversupply of elementary teachers. And then moderate disabilities at the secondary level, the 5 through 12, and then you see early childhood. So those were the top 4 license areas that where districts hired emergency licensed folks. And then statewide, you see that 56% of those individuals working under an emergency license were brand new hires, whereas 44% were individuals who were already in a role, like they had a waiver from last year, or they were a paraprofessional. And so it's kind of an even split in terms of new hires as compared to current hires. And Amanda, that may answer your question a little bit in terms of those individuals who had already been in the district and were working under a waiver. Usually they're on that waiver because they haven't yet passed the MTEL, though they've taken it. And I don't know so much about the 56% who were brand new. That's a little bit more, that's where we could dive in a little bit more to see, did people actually even, were they able to access the MTEL at all? And then, oh, go ahead.
Well, just to make sure I'm understanding, so out of the 8,000 plus that were issued, it was, we're almost 2,000, is it 2,000, almost 2,000 that are in classrooms teaching? I'm just wanting to make sure I understand the number.
So this is from October. So these top 4 license areas are based on an N of 18,
Okay,
1,817.
right.
So of those, are you looking at the license areas?
Well, I was just wondering, because wasn't the number over 8,000 of total
Yeah.
issued,
Yeah,
right?
that's as of May.
As of May, and
About
then
8,500.
okay, but it's, you know, about 1,800 that are utilizing in the classroom setting.
Oh no,
And
sorry.
I'm just making, okay,
Yeah, this
so
is
I'm
where
not
it's
understanding that.
confusing. No,
Okay.
totally fine. This is where it's confusing. So the
Okay.
8,500, that represents the number of emergency licenses that we've issued as of May.
Okay,
But the thing is that we only get information from districts about who's in their schools in October.
okay,
So this data that I'm sharing with you now about like who's teaching where and which licenses and things like that, this is from our October collection, which is only 1,817 emergency licenses.
okay.
So it's like because we don't yet, we have to wait until October of 2021 to get the next set of data from districts.
Okay, so presumably it'll be more.
Exactly.
A lot
So
more
next
out of that
set
8,000.
Exactly. Yep, I would
Okay.
imagine so.
Thank you.
But Heather,
No, it's confusing. I get it. Go ahead, Ventura.
But just so I'm clear, so but the districts reported in our October, data collection that there were about 1,800 teachers on emergency licenses working in our schools, and of that pool, roughly 35% were teachers of color.
That's correct.
Which is, what are we typically 8-9% of the typical teacher pool? So
9%,
like,
yes, on average, 9% of Massachusetts, not even on average, 9% of Massachusetts teachers are teachers of color.
So this pool reported in October, that was one snapshot, was basically 4 times more racially diverse, this pool, than the more statewide, teacher workforce. Is that?
Yeah.
That's right, as of the October collection.
As the October,
right.
only October, yep.
Yeah. Sorry, I know having the multiple data sets is confusing.
This is good.
Yeah.
Okay, so then the question that was like all of this is interesting, but I wanted to know, so where are these people teaching? because generally teachers who have less content knowledge often are often assigned to teach in districts with higher percentages of students of color and students who are low income. And it may be that these teachers actually do have content knowledge and they couldn't pass the MTEL, or they couldn't even access the MTEL. So I want to be clear, like we're still we're unclear, which is why we want to evaluate. We're unclear about their impact and their knowledge. We just know that they have an emergency license. So where are they teaching? So Springfield and Boston hired over 20% of those teachers who had emergency licenses as of October. And then we had, you see there are just under 300 districts hired just like one emergency licensed teacher. And keep in mind, many of our districts are quite small and don't even have a very large teaching force. So this isn't surprising. Okay. But the top 10 hiring districts, so those districts that hired the greatest number of teachers on emergency licenses, are in this little chart right here. And the percent represents the percent of teachers on emergency licenses. So Springfield, Boston, Lawrence, Holyoke, Fall River, New Bedford, and Lynn, and then Worcester, Lowell, and Pittsfield. These were all the top hiring districts when it came to hiring teachers on emergency licenses. Mm. And so what we've tried to do, working with our statewide system of support, is reach out to these districts to provide them with additional access or reminders of access of supports available for new teachers, and particularly for individuals who haven't passed the MTEL, and we think in many cases, although we don't know this data yet, have not completed an educator preparation program. So we're particularly for those districts like Lawrence, Holyoke, Fall River, New Bedford, like these districts that are receiver districts or districts that are within the statewide system of support. We tried to help provide additional supports around staffing. So let me just stop my share there because that is all the data that I have, and pause and see if you have comments or questions. It's pretty interesting, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, I can't wait to hear sort of the full story that it tells, this data. And as you go through the evaluation, it'll certainly be informative, and we'll learn a lot about, you know, the different ways that quality education can be delivered and by who. So exactly. I think that that's really going to be interesting. I think it would be good to know sort of over time, as you continue to engage with these top 10 districts, sort of what is their goal for these individuals to bring them into the system, you know, and provide the supports they need in whatever way that needs to take shape and whatever their individual circumstances are. So it's kind of like, what's the sort of mentality of the districts relative to the emergency license and how they are thinking about the human capital that they've just gotten an infusion of. So just being able to keep tabs on that, what they're doing and how they're supporting would be, I think, very interesting to hear. And then what is DESE doing to continue to provide additional supports? And again, from a retention perspective, if that's what the goal is, what are they doing on that, along those lines?
That's a great point. I think it also highlights the importance of thinking of the systems of our initiatives. So you've heard me talk a lot about the importance of giving educators access to high quality instructional materials and aligned professional development. Well, this year, even more so, in order to promote coherence, as well as when you're looking at a cadre of teachers who don't have a lot of preparation or previous experience, making sure that they have access to coherent, high quality instructional materials and aligned PD is going to be additionally important. So it's just kind of weaving these systemic aspects together. Let me do a time check, Ventura. I have the update on the MTEL alternative assessment pilot. Do you want me to do like 5 minutes, 10 minutes? What's
Yeah, I think maybe 10 total with presentation and time for some
questions.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to shift to the second update, and I'm not going to screen share only because I think it's going to be better to just look at each other and talk about it. So you may remember, hopefully you do, that you all approved last fall of October 2020, you approved the commissioner to go forward and do some pilots of alternative assessments to the Massachusetts Test of Educator licensure, or the MTELs. And so we're running now 3 different pilots, and I'm going to update you on each of the 3. So the first is an alternative to the communications and literacy skills test. So this is a required test for educators to complete. And this alternative, this sort of first part of the pilot, allows other tests besides our existing MTEL to be used and approved for the purposes of licensure. So we released an RFR in February, and we selected 2 vendors who are on board with us now to provide alternative assessments. One is ETS, Education Testing Services, and the second is Pearson. And so we've just approved a total between these 2 vendors of 6 different tests. So 6 new tests that are alternatives to the communications and literacy skills test. So it's still assessment in terms of like a standardized assessment form, but it's a different assessment than the existing one. Although it has to align with the standards that we're trying to measure. So we're just trying to like broaden the opportunities for candidates to take additional tests. And this is particularly relevant to candidates coming from other states who have said to us before, like, I already passed this test in New York or Connecticut. Why do I have to come to Massachusetts and do a different one and pay for it again and all of those things? So we said, okay, as long as these tests, as long as we can demonstrate, or the vendors can demonstrate that they align with what we're seeking to measure, we're going to open it up to more tests. So that's the first alternative. The second is what we call the subject matter alternative option. So here again, for a license in a subject area, you have to complete an MTEL that assesses your content knowledge in that subject area. And so here again, we went out and asked for responses from vendors who could provide us with alternatives to measure subject matter knowledge in different ways. And so we received 2 responses, and we're still working through with them which tests we'll accept based on their alignment with the MTEL test objectives. And so depending upon how we move forward with those responses and our assessment of those, the team expects that we'll have those options available to candidates either in late summer or early fall. So that's an alternative to the subject matter assessment. And we expect that we'll consider other options, and we'll probably put an additional RFR out for bid to try to get even more alternatives as alternative measures of subject matter knowledge. So that's still in progress. And the third area is where we said, okay, we have a bunch of candidates who go through educator preparation programs. Could we say to the prep programs, we're going to leave it in your hands to attest to your candidate's subject matter knowledge? And so in February, we put out guidance to the prep programs about what this option would look like if they wanted to do this, and how they could apply to us to be able to have this, this authority. And so the initial applications were due in early April, and we received just one from one preparation program. But then at the beginning of June, we started accepting these applications on a rolling basis. So just this week, we got 3 more new applications from other ed prep providers. And we expect that there will be a few more over the upcoming weeks, because we did a survey of the prep programs to gauge their interest. And we think we'll have all told about 5 or more available options for candidates in these like 5 different programs at the beginning of this academic year. So again, we're working with our prep programs. We've encouraged them to connect with each other, to connect with us, to talk about possibilities for this option. So that is where we are in terms of those three different options. Oh, one last thing is that we also hired a vendor to come on board to evaluate these three different pilot options, because obviously this is a 3-year pilot. We want to get really good data. We want to be able to see, like, how do these options play out? And I'm excited to say that we brought on board a research group called CALDER, which stands for the Center for Applied Longitudinal Data in Education Research, CLADER. And we've worked with them in the past, and they are like a consortium of researchers from universities across the country. The main ones we're working with are out of the University of Washington. And the nice thing about them is we've worked with them before, so they know our data systems, which is going to be hopefully really helpful. So we're meeting with them monthly, and we get updates from them about their progress on the evaluation. So that is it. And I think we have like about 4 minutes for questions or comments.
Thank you. I have a question about just other ways we're looking at the adaptation of the exams themselves. I mean, you talked about these different alternatives and alignment with test objectives. But I'm wondering from sort of the perspective of approaching it with the cultural competency and anti-bias. I'm just trying to think of sort of the equity lens that's being put on thinking about these different options and the vendors that are implementing them. Just because we hear that as an obstacle, as a concern that there's potentially that in the assessments themselves or exams. So I'm just wondering about that. And then something around, is there anything sort of addressing sort of the maybe English language barriers, that kind of thing, that I think has also come up as a potential challenge for educators whose first language may not be English?
So the anti-bias question, I'll take that first. So the existing assessments now go through a review with the vendor and with people from our team, as well as a technical advisory committee and educators themselves, to review the different items related to bias. So that's one way in which we try to ensure that we're looking at that and examining that. The second thing I would say is that we're embarking on another initiative that is related, though it's separate. And so we were awarded funding through a competitive process out of the Institute for Educational Sciences, IES. And so we're doing a research study over the next several years around input measures and teacher output measures, or measures of teacher impact. And so the reason this is related to this question around anti-bias is because what it's allowing us to do is to look at measures of impact that teachers are making that are not traditionally examined when we define teacher effectiveness. And so it's really interesting measures, like things like student voting numbers, like longitudinal data on college going rates, student survey data. It's just like a really interesting set of data elements. And then we're kind of backward mapping from that into the input data, like where were they prepared? What was the route that they took? How did they do on the MTEL? So that study, although it's not the same as what you were asking, Member Fernandez, in terms of like the MTEL itself, that study we hope will open up for us a better understanding of teacher impact, as well as what the input measures were for the teachers to make that impact. So it's allowing us to broaden our definitions of teacher effectiveness, which we think is deeply connected to the question of anti-bias in assessing teacher impact.
Yeah, yeah. I guess my reaction to the three pilots was, or the question that came to mind was, the prep programs doing their own assessment is very interesting to me, because I would assume that they have a fuller sort of perspective on the candidates. And so it's not just about the exam itself, but the sort of holistic picture. Because if we're saying we believe that teachers of color can bring added perspective and impact and connection to students, like how can that be measured and quantified as part of the teacher prep program? Because I'm not going to say that just because you're a teacher of color that you automatically have that, but in most cases, how will that be sort of additive to sort of whether the components that go into whether a teacher should be granted a license or not? What weight can that carry?
And to your point, you could, if you're a prep program, you see the teachers in their clinical placements. And so you could use that as measures of your determination of whether or not they have the subject matter knowledge to make impact with students. So I was a little surprised we hadn't received more applications for this, but on the other hand, I think it means that the prep programs are taking it quite seriously and like didn't want to just leap into this until feeling that they were prepared to be able to make these judgments. So Ventura, I think I just blew through like 3 extra minutes. So
yeah, I actually had a question, if I might.
Sure.
I didn't catch the second assessment option that you said. I don't know why I missed it, but I got the comms and literacy skills test, and there's 6 new tests that you're looking at, and then obviously the prep program one. What was the middle one?
It's the subject matter alternative. So comm literacy doesn't measure your knowledge of math or your knowledge of history. And so the second option is to see if there are expanded ways that we can measure subject matter knowledge.
Okay, great. And then can you just tell me how long, remind me, I don't remember how long the emergency status is for?
It's through June 2022. Okay. So the emergency license statute will expire as of June 30th, 2022.
Okay, and then I'm sorry, I think you even said when you expect to have gone through these assessments and have a decision or whatever. When is that going to be? When you kind of have
the MTEL alternative pilot?
Yeah, the alternative assessments. Yeah.
It's a 3-year pilot. So it starts 2021, like this academic year, and then 2 more years after that.
Great. Thank you so much.
Sure. It was a bit delayed because of the pandemic, and we had hoped to bring it to the board last spring and then came in the fall.
Sure. Thank you.
Sure.
And Heather, sorry, just in the, when do you expect that the emergency licensure evaluation, sort of that work specifically, when do you think that'll be concluded?
You know, I don't know there, because we just got the evaluator on board, or sorry, we don't yet have, we just got the proposal out, so we haven't even yet hired an evaluator. But what I would hope that they do, which we've done in the past, is get the data and some findings like along the way. That's what we did with EdEval, because we didn't want to like wait 3 years and then come out with the policy changes. So I'm hopeful that they can like generate some early findings, even as early as like, you know, early winter, I would say, before because we're going to need to do some advocacy in either direction. And I'm sure people will be curious. Should I hand it back to you?
Yes, thank you.
All right, sure. Thank you all.
So I'm just saying June 2022 is just around the corner. Like, I mean, so like there'll be decisions that need to be made. So I appreciate that. Okay, great. Super interesting stuff. Thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Jessica and Chris, you know, to give an update on just legislation that we're tracking at the department.
Thanks, Ventura. I think this will be a little bit faster. Heather has the more weighty work here. As a quick overview, well, first, do you have the memo that was sent out? Do you have that in front of you? Okay, so I won't share my screen because I like looking at you too.
Sorry, I don't have it in front of me, but I did look at it. So
Oh, good.
anything
All
you
right.
want to say is fine.
All right. I included the most significant bills that are being looked at right now, and I included the first one as Senator Crichton's, even though it doesn't have a lot of focus on teacher diversity. It's really intended to racially integrate schools. But there is a grant program in that bill that would be able to be used for teacher and school leader diversity. And the hearing on that is tomorrow. So I thought we'd discuss that a little bit too. But as a general overview on what we've been helping legislators with as they draft these bills, Senator Crichton actually had long discussions with our staff when he was drafting this back in November and December. He has this one, he has a housing bill. He has a couple. He's very focused, like the co-chairs. And we've also been having significant conversations with the co-chairs too on the bills that I know you've been involved in, Member Fernandez, an act relative to educator diversity. And those have been filed both in the Senate and the House. Those probably most significantly this session diversify teacher workforce. And I also did include House 583, which is, it does say it's an act ensuring diversity in public education. We were not involved with that one at all. I know I had spoken with Manny when you all were drafting the bills that you had the co-chairs file an act relative to educator diversity, but we didn't work at all with Representative Nika Elguardo. It's similar with the MTEL flexibilities that they offer, but a little bit more proscriptive. And I think the department aligns much better with the ones that the co-chairs filed on behalf of your groups, Member Fernandez. I did want to make sure that you knew that we had been working with, different legislators, providing them with the information, lots of staff involved, and we're watching them closely. It is difficult to make any sort of judgment on any of them right now, as none of them have had hearings yet, but Chris will be at the hearing tomorrow that the Education Committee will have, and Senate 305 will be discussed in that hearing. So I'll look forward to having his notes in front of us, and the governor is interested too. So we'll be providing an overview of what's discussed at this particular hearing. What questions do you have for me?
I mean, I don't have any regarding the Educator Diversity Act. So
yeah,
I mean, I just appreciate the knowledge of sort of the role you all play in monitoring these different bills, and the work you do on behalf of BESE to monitor and be able to have conversations and serve as a resource to staffers, et cetera, who need more understanding of what these mean. So it's just good knowledge for me to have. I don't know if there's anything else that you think we ought to know about the role you all play with these bills, but I'm obviously well versed in at least the Educator Diversity Act.
Are there any comments that are being submitted from the department on any of these bills, Jessica?
Not yet. We haven't been asked. Usually we do wait until we're asked. However, with these bills, we do have monthly meetings with co-chairs Peisch and Lewis, and we have already been discussing the educator diversity bills, and they're very interested in them as well. So, yep, we've had an open conversation going back and forth about them. We wouldn't be surprised if some language gets changed, something gets added, that's what the process is. And that's where we get involved when the committee really starts working on the feedback that they receive in hearings. So we'll see when that hearing ends up being for those two bills, Senate 366 and House 682.
Great. Any further questions? All right.
Not for me.
Thank you, Jessica. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Jessica.
Thank you.
Welcome.
The next item was just wanted to share a little bit about how we've been communicating educator diversification as one of the strategies that schools and districts really can be using their ESSER funds for. And so sort of a few things I wanted to share at a high level. One is, you might remember when the Student Opportunity Act, sort of the application was being designed, we as a department put together a series of evidence-based practices that included diversifying the educator workforce as one of the areas that, you know, districts should sort of really consider in terms of when they're using those funding sources. Additionally, you know, those identified areas qualified for what we called a multiplier effect, which if you chose one of those areas in terms of how you use your SOA funds, we at the department would be putting out additional funding opportunities to multiply, you know, sort of the investment you're making locally to support those efforts. So the reason I say that is because as ESSER 3 applications especially were being developed, as a department, we decided to stay very close to those evidence-based practices that we designed and identified for SOA, and actually bake them into the application that districts had to complete for ESSER 3. So when you look at that application, you know, there are tabs that ask you to think about like your implementation plan, and we list there explicitly evidence-based strategies, interventions, and support. And one of those is specifically looking at talent development and staffing, and identifies diversifying the educator workforce, recruitment and retention strategies as one of the interventions that, again, we felt baking it into the application itself really signaled the commitment that we as an agency and as a state really have around you know, that as a strategy. And so that is sort of officially the way that we're trying to bake it in to the process. You know, we work with many districts across the Commonwealth, everything from, you know, the diversity networks that Shay runs, all the grants that we offer. I work with Lawrence. And so, you know, that's another way that, you know, especially as we've published resources this year around supporting a more diverse and culturally responsive workforce, like we continue to sort of work with districts around specific programming and how they can use these funds in particular to accelerate the work, oftentimes that they're already doing. But I'd say just from a structural level, just wanted to bring that to the board because I'm not sure that was as clear, you know, in terms of the ESSER application, that ESSER 3 applications that districts are putting out or applying for now.
Yeah, I don't think it was. So thanks for flagging that. And I think these are the ways in which sort of you all and sort of how reporting happens to the board is being able to highlight how the equity work is being infused in different, you know, different ways is helpful. And so calling that out at our meetings, because I remember seeing the application itself, but I didn't sort of connect that there was a particular focus on key initiatives that were already in place. Obviously, this one that you just talked about as one of them. So anyway, I think just for the board to continue to hear that this is how integration is happening, because I think it's good for us to always have that in mind and to see how the department is not treating the work as sort of the separate, even though it's a department in and of itself, but but how you're infusing the equity work in all of what DESE's doing.
Yeah, I understand that there's also we're working on a separate guidance in addition to you know, what we've baked into the application and the SOA work. We're putting out relatively soon a separate guidance document that just goes a little bit deeper, you know, in terms of the areas that that we're highlighting as evidence-based practices, again, including the diversifying the educator workforce. So once that's finalized and ready to share out, you know, we'll share it with the board as well. Just to your point, I mean, I think so much of this is the commitment, I think, especially from the commissioner, has been that these are priorities that we're just trying to bake into the DNA of how schools go about planning and, implementing practice. And so really fair point though about how we need to make that more explicit. Helps the board when we make it more explicit in some of those core, the structures that we run.
And it's not like I haven't noticed. I've definitely noticed.
Right. Yeah.
But I don't think there's ever too much that can be said. Because it might be something I don't know that I listen for, but it's become really evident just how you all have sort of changed the way you talk about all the work across the department with the equity lens. But so I want to say that it's not like I know that it's happening, but it doesn't hurt to make it even more continual and clear.
Yep.
As we go on the journey as a board,
Right.
which is my hope. Yeah.
Yep. Mary, I don't know if there are questions or comments. If not, I'm happy to talk about the racial equity decision-making tool as the last.
I'd love for you to say a few words about that. I'd love to hear more about that.
Yep, great. Talking about how we institutionalize work, right, or bake it into the fabric of what we do. We've had a diversity, equity, and inclusion committee that's been working for a couple of years now. I will be very candid that, the events of the past 16, 17 months, sort of the racial reckoning that I think our country, finally feels like started confronting, did lead us internally to sort of mobilize and say, okay, as a department, like what are the ways that we can actively, even more actively, I'd say, because I think there are efforts underway, but ensure that we're centering equity and racial equity in everything that we do. And we decided to create programming and policies and things that were focused on the internal agency, the 500-ish staff, if you include consultants that we work with. And so one of the most important things we tried to seek out to answer is, what does it mean to bring an equity lens to our work? And so anyone can have their own definition, and that's fine, but we felt like it was important for BESE to have a definition of what does it mean to bring an equity lens or apply an equity lens to our work. And so what we did is, again, this is a committee of staff from throughout the agency. We named that as one of our priorities, worked with leadership with the commissioner to name it as, again, one of the strategies we were implementing. And then we worked with just different partners who had either designed sort of processes like this or could provide support. And so we ended up designing this tool that's based on a tool that is used by a group called GARE, which is the Government Action on Racial Equity, I believe is the acronym. And so, they had a lot of resources that we were able to use to modify something for our agency. And at the end of the day is what it is. It's a 6-step process that really tries to center goals around equity and racial equity from the start, and sort of naming and defining either the problems to be addressed or the opportunities, ensuring that we're thinking about it from an equity and racial equity lens from the beginning, and then sort of going through a series of steps where we're asked to critically look at data that currently exists or that we need to assess current state, like talk to stakeholders most impacted or affected by the programs, use all of that information to then start designing strategy, not start with the strategy first and let's go at it, and then continuing to sort of share, refine, get feedback, what's benchmark data. And it's really a cycle. Like we have to go back as we're getting data, how do we tweak it? How do we move forward? But at the end of the day, what it's done is at least presented an agency-wide framework. We did roll it out to our entire agency in May. And what the work looks like for us heading into sort of the summer next year is we're creating a specific work plan. While different centers have already started practicing the tool and choosing initiatives to use it with, we're creating a series of supports, including agency-wide training, customized sort of, support on demand as needed to teams as they go through the cycle, using this. And so we're also hoping to transition the tool from what now is mostly like a PDF, you know what I mean, like a document, to more of an interactive web-based where you can actually click on different resources that are aligned to different steps to help you. You know, for example, if you're doing stakeholder engagement, like, are there particular tools or ways to do that that teams can access? And so we are looking to make that a more living, you know, sort of resource in terms of the tool. And then working with leadership to, at the end of the day, like, it's going to be a nice tool and looks great, but working with leadership to make sure that we are modeling and leading and committing, you know, to using it in all of our centers, and obviously calibrating around, you know, the projects we're going to practice using this tool with. How do we capture the learnings? How do we improve? But that's our goal for this year, to really have, you know, much stronger supports to teams and to leaders as they're leading this. So, you know, I think one possible connection for the board is, one, to make sure that you all continue to be aware of how the work is evolving, because ultimately, if you're aware of the kind of processes we're using to develop, you know, policies and programs, and it provides common language for you all to ask us, you know, like how we went about, you know, different parts of the process, you know, as one way of how I see the board interacting with us as an agency, you know, with use of this tool. So it's kind of an overview. Happy to just entertain questions, comments, you know, at this time.
Do you have anything, Member Stewart? It seemed like you, okay. I mean, I guess I'm thinking, so maybe at the meeting, at the May meeting, because I hadn't really seen the tool, I had just kind of put it out there. Could we as a board utilize the tool in some way? Thank you, Heather. Okay, anyway, so I guess I'm just thinking, based on what you said, Ventura, is there a way, maybe the first step is, can you all maybe help us understand and sort of see how the tool was used in a particular process you were using for a new idea or a new initiative, if that's possible, like help us sort of see how the tool was applied in an actual, so like a case study, I guess, of how it was applied in a process. I think it would be helpful for the board to, again, sort of see the tool's application in work that you all are doing. And then that will help us to, and I think me too, but I'd also like to continue to have conversations with you all about the tool to see if there are components that can apply to how the board is doing their own decision making. And we don't do decision making where we can sit around and sort of utilize the tool and go through that kind of process, but there is sort of the training of the lens we should have in our own personal decision making when we vote for something, right? So I guess that's what I'm trying to get at, is what is sort of a process we can use to help inform the board of the actual application of the tool and start building mindsets and ways in which we're thinking that align with the aspects of the tool to help us in our own voting, how it, so that we can be representing the work that you all are doing and practicing it ourselves. That wasn't very articulate, but I was just trying to sense make out loud, like, how can we use this? Because I think it's great. And again, I think we can only be as good as a whole department if it's everybody engaging in this work in some way.
Yeah, I would say two things quickly. One is, you know, so last meeting with the acceleration roadmap that Como and her team presented, one thing I was thrilled about is that they actually had a whole slide on this tool, and you know, sort of didn't go like step by step of how they applied it, which I think is more what you're asking for, which I think makes a lot of sense. But just as, for the board to say that, I was really proud that we had such a major initiative that actually they used the tool to go through and design. And so I think we can unpack that for you all more, like how decisions were made or what changed as a result of using that tool. So the good news is that people are using it right now. It's super exciting to see, but I think we can make that more explicit. And the second is, Chair Craven, when we started planning for the different retreats that the board has had, this is one area that we identified, and she asked me to share, sort of the high level overview at the last retreat, but I do see that as an opportunity or a venue for the board to go a little deeper, with the tool, specifically as it relates to like how the board may use it for, its own work. So I think that could be a good place to continue that conversation.
Great. Well, I know we're over time. It's a good start, and I want to continue down that path a bit more on the tool. So,
Great.
All right. Anything else as we wrap up and adjourn this
Right.
discussion of the committee?
Right.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no, thank you all.
Very informative.
you.
And how do we, Helene, get notes to the rest of the committee? I'd like to make sure that they are aware of what happened in the meeting. Can I send them something, or you, on some of the discussion, just to keep them in the loop?
Or if you want to send them to me, that's fine. Or you could email the committee directly.
Okay.
Either way works,
Okay.
Amanda.
All right. Well, I'll be in
Okay.
touch with you offline then. I don't want to
Okay.
take up any more of you all's time. So
Okay,
No,
sounds
thank you.
good.
thank you so much.
Have a
Nice
good
to see
afternoon,
you.
everyone. Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Take care.
Thank you. Nice to
Thanks,
see you.
everyone.